Don't share the screen as yet. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, everyone. We will begin today the second chapter of Canto 2. So before we begin this chapter, I would like to summarize the first chapter that we did last week, and then we will move on to this wonderful chapter. So just to recap what's been happening is that Maharaj Parikshit, just in a few days actually, he's going to leave this world. So naturally, one needs to be very much in anxiety as to what will happen. You know, when one is dying, you know, one is in great anxiety. And that anxiety or caring about how one will spend the last few days, it can be spent in one of the two ways. Just 1 second, I need to turn off this. Okay. It can be spent in one of the two ways. One can cover one's consciousness in deep illusion to forget what's going on. Or one can become more sincere because there's nothing to hold on to. This is it. It's just a few days left. I'm going to focus my consciousness on Krishna. And one thinks it is clear that material happiness is not going to bring anything. So Maharaj Parikshit, due to his purity, he summoned the mercy of Krishna, who came in the form of Shukadeva Goswami. He had decided not to go towards the path of illusion, the first path, but to focus his mind on Krishna. But the sages could not answer the question of what is the duty of one about to die. One of the sages said sacrifices, some others said meditation, others austerities. But when Shukadeva Goswami appeared, everyone recognized that here is someone who is authority and who can answer the question. And so they offered him the greatest seat of respect. And when Parikshit and Maharaj and Shukadeva Goswami met, he had asked, Parikshit Maharaj asked this question: what is the duty of everyone, but especially of one who is about to die? So in response, Shukadeva Goswami, in the last chapter, he first glorified the question itself. Why? Because it evokes Krishna Katha. Truly, there's no other duty we have, because life is temporary, and every duty that we accept will pull us away from Krishna, except for chanting Krishna's name, engaging in devotional service. The effects from bhakti that we get is eternal. So it is a choice, eternal or temporary. So Shukadeva Goswami glorified Parikshit Maharaj's question, and he criticized those who wasted their lives. He criticized the Grihamedis who desire happiness only on the material level, which brings frustration. And then Shukadeva Goswami recommended for one who's about to die, is to focus one's mind on Krishna. But in order to do that, he first suggested that one should be renounced. This is the first part. And now in this chapter, he's going to explain the stages of progression in one's lives. But the stage of renunciation of material sense enjoyment is truly essential for advancement in spiritual life. Um, Prabhupada gives that example of pouring water on fire and putting it out at the same time, because sense enjoyment binds one to the material life and one's mind becomes feverish. Rather, in Krishna consciousness, one desires to serve Krishna, and therefore one has to be detached. It could be just mentally, conscious wise, but one renunciation is needed. One should be brave and fearless and prepare for death by renouncing home and meditating on the virat root, the universal form. So that's what he explained in the last chapter. And what was this? This was a methodology of seeing spirit and matter, but it can be perceived as part of the gigantic body of the Lord, because nothing can be seen as separate from the Lord. So how it consists of him, that is the universal form. So whatever there is that we see today, rivers, oceans, they can be all seen as part of the Lord. So in the last chapter, he recommends that the materialist should see how the material world is part of Krishna. But then in this chapter, he explains that better than the first step in God realization is to meditate upon the Lord in the heart. This form is spiritual. Virat form is material, not a form of Krishna. So that was the difference. It is not separate from Krishna, yet it is not him. The Virat Roop was there from the beginning. It is not false, and yet it is not composed of that spiritual quality that Krishna is personally composed of. The Virat Roop conception is welcomed by Mayavadis because the Lord is everything and everything there is in him with no individuality. However, it does not limit it. Better is to meditate on the supersoul. So let's begin this chapter where Shukadev Goswami is going to take us to the next step of meditation, and which is to meditate on the supersoul. So in our first slide, Shukadev Goswami explains how the universal form of the Lord is authorized. Even Brahma meditated on it in order to create. And this covers verse 1. Text 1, Srila Shukadev Goswami said, formerly, prior to the manifestation of the cosmos, Lord Brahma, by meditating on the Virat Roop, regained his lost consciousness by appeasing the Lord. Thus, he was able to rebuild the creation as it was before. So in this first verse, Shukadev Goswami is explaining that the universal form is so powerful that Brahma himself, who is the most intelligent, could not understand how to create. But by meditating on this form, he could create. Shukadev Goswami did not imagine the universal form, but Brahma meditated on it. And Prabhupada explains in the purport that Brahma could not understand how to serve. So in the same way, when the jiva meditates on Krishna, he regains the capacity to serve. Krishna consciousness is actually inherent in all of us. And Krishna has to be remembered. Just like a person who has amnesia, he has to be reminded, and then gradually it may come back. So in the same way, the living entity is presented with the name, form, and pastimes of Krishna, and he starts remembering the Lord. Then in the 2nd to the 5th verses, the need of renunciation is again explained to Parikshit Maharaj. Because there is a tendency for the living entity within the material world to forget, even if one is a sannyasi or a religious person, because the allurement is so strong that while grasping for material enjoyment, there is tendency to become entangled. So Shukadev Goswami is speaking very strongly to Parikshit Maharaj. Parikshit Maharaj, he cannot afford to doubt or to commit mistakes anything other than remembering Krishna at this point in his life. The first thing he says that is that even though the Vedas recommend religious performances, one should not get bewildered by it. And that leads us to our next slide, where Shukadev Goswami says that one should not get bewildered. One should not follow the karma kanda path. Material life is a losing game. That covers text 2 and 3. So what does Shukadev Goswami say? The way of presentation of the Vedic sounds is so bewildering that it directs the intelligence of the people to meaningless things like the heavenly kingdoms. The conditioned souls hover in dreams of such heavenly, illusory pleasures, but actually they do not relish any tangible happiness in such places. For this reason, the enlightened person should endeavor only for the minimum necessities of life while in the world of names. He should be intelligently fixed and never endeavor for unwanted things, being competent to perceive practically that all such endeavors are merely hard labor for nothing. So here, Prabhupada is explaining that the Vedas deal with the subject matter of the modes of nature. We know that, right? We've heard about that. Even though the purpose of the Vedas is to get out. The fulfillment of material desires is given so that we can gradually become detached. But the purpose is service of Krishna. So Parikshit Maharaj here is warned that one should not have material goals, even though if it is backed by Shastra, because that would be a form of bewilderment. Actually, why is it a form of bewilderment? Because we want to be happy. We think that some material situation will make us happy. But Prabhupada explains that actually there's no situation in the material world that can give us happiness. Prabhupada explains how everyone has their own realm of existence, and we try so hard to find happiness in that realm. Even if we had possessed everything in the material universe, we would still not be satisfied. This is the goal of materialistic people, to exploit for pleasure. But Prabhupada explains in the purport that even after mining the mountains and mining the sea and squeezing this out of that, but still no one is happy. Rather, he wants to go to the moon to exploit the resources there. Actually something very interesting. In the 1970s, when they were predicting that by the end of the century, which we have already passed, there will be excursion trips to the moon. With that promise, the Pan American Airlines was formed. And they were actually selling tickets to the moon so that you could get a seat in advance, in the first few trips. So you can see, so the idea was that if you really want to enjoy, then you should go to the moon, because there is real enjoyment. Here, one is not that much, right? You can get some happiness, but if you go to the moon, there will be really wonderful happiness. They were selling, and they were even going to the extent of selling the mining rights on the moon. And they were selling advertising space on the moon, and it's just really crazy. And now what has happened? There's no trips to the moon. The Pan American Airlines is out of business, right? So this becomes so absurd, just to try to squeeze some pleasure without thinking that I have done so many things to become happy. Why will it be now, right? So Shukadev Goswami is saying, don't believe if the Shastra is saying there's happiness there. And because of that, Shukadev Goswami is strongly condemning any endeavor to maintain oneself in this material world. And of course, he's preaching from his personal example. He was completely detached. And we see, and like I mentioned last time, the Goswamis in Vrindavan, up to the time of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, was very, very renounced. Madhavendra Puri did not even beg for food. In other words, one should have the deepest commitment to the spiritual path. One should live so simply and use his human life for this reason. And one should never endeavor for unwanted things. those things that we desire for our senses. So actually, the things that we aspire for happiness, they actually don't bring us happiness, but it actually brings us envy. So the question may remain, how can then we find food, shelter, and clothing without making some endeavor? If Shukadev Goswami is saying, don't make any endeavor, then is that practical? How are we going to find food, shelter, and clothing? How will we live? Now, Shukadev Goswami answers that question in verses 4 and 5 in our next slide, where he says, one needs very little to maintain oneself. So I'll read you these translations. When there is ample earthly flats to lie on, what is the necessity of cots and beds? When one can use his own arms, what is the necessity of a pillow? When one can use the palms of his hands, what is the necessity of varieties of utensils? When there is ample covering of the skins of trees, what is the necessity of clothing? Are there no torn clothes lying on the common road? Do the trees which exist for maintaining others no longer give alms in charity? Do the rivers being dried up no longer supply water to the thirsty? Are the caves of the mountains not closed? Or above all, does the Almighty Lord not protect and fully surrendered souls? Why then do the learned sages go to flatter those who are intoxicated by hard-earned wealth? So it would become a fad if you would be walking around in a tree bark, isn't it? So Prabhupada explains in the purport that it means that the most important point to understand is that Krishna is our protector. That's the bottom line. And that someone in the renounced order should take his shelter for that reason. He should take shelter of Krishna because he is the ultimate protector. And so why would he flatter worldly people? So Prabhupada explains how those in the renounced order are not meant for begging. It is not that they are not contributing anything to society, but actually they have a great contribution to give. Such people are learned, they live alone. The point is that one should depend completely on Krishna, surrender to him. Why? At the last moment of his life, whatever we depend on is not going to be there. Like, for example, when we're flying in the sky, there's no help. In the same way, when we find ourselves alone at the time of death, unless we find help before that moment comes, we have no help at that time. Our relationship with Krishna by then, should be fully opened. Sannyasis, for example, are known as civilly dead. The responsibility is only spiritual for them and for others. They're completely fearless, knowing that Krishna is with them. Like good examples is Prabhupada, who came alone to the United States. He left his family at the age of almost 70. He was here all by himself. But he was fearless. He depended on Krishna's shelter. Otherwise, how is it possible that an old man can come for the first time to the United States on a cargo ship? And we know the story when we read the Lilamrit, all the difficulties that he went through. So Shukadev Goswami has spoken very strongly here. He's saying to Parikshit Maharaj, don't waste your energy just for surviving. Rather, use your human energy for something higher. So what should one do? And what should one not do? He explains one should render service unto the supersoul within the heart. So what Shukadev Goswami, he continues to say in text 6 is that we should not keep on adjusting a life situation all our life. Rather, we should get to the root of it. Rather, we should get to the cause. The fact that we have a material body and we're situated in material existence, that is the root cause. So by worshiping the supersoul, we can end the cause of the problem at the root. In other words, we are looking for shelter, and the supersoul can give us that shelter. Matter cannot give us shelter. Shukadev Goswami is saying that you don't have to go anywhere because the Lord is within the heart. Now, Prabhupada explains that this does not suggest that we should not go to the temples, which are centers of learning, because we need that. We can see that when there are no activities in the temple, people are not interested. They look for sense gratification, and that is seen by the godless civilization, right? And everything becomes intolerable. So some people say, don't go to the temple because God is everywhere. But people are not qualified to see him everywhere. So that's the answer. Why we cannot just simply meditate on the supersoul? Because we are not qualified to see him within the heart. Rather than seeing the trees as part of the universal form, we see them as a tree and something to exploit. So in other words, it is very difficult for us to see everything in relationship with the Lord until we have association and we go to the temple where we have that association, where we can see the Lord in the form of the deity. So this is very interesting how Prabhupada explains what Shukadev Goswami is saying, and then he gives a practical application, right, in today's world. So in our next slide, Shukadev Goswami talks about the beauty of Paramatma, the Lord in the heart, verses 6 to 11. So I'll just read one text here. So where he explains, where Shukadev Goswami says, others conceive of the personality of Godhead residing within the body of the region of the heart and measuring only 8 inches with 4 hands, carrying a lotus, a wheel of a chariot, a conch shell, and a club respectively. Now this is a very wonderful purport for this text, where Prabhupada is explaining what is this super soul. So he's explaining in more detail how the measurement of the localized personality of Godhead is estimated to expand from the ring finger to the end of the thumb, more or less 8 inches. The form of the Lord described in this verse with distribution of different symbols, beginning from the lower right hand up and down to the lower left hand with lotus, wheel of a chariot, conch and club respectively, is called Janardhan, or the plenary portion of the Lord who controls the general mass. He continues to write, Prabhupada, here, there are many other forms of the Lord with varied situations of the symbols of lotus, conch shell, etc. And they're differently known. And then he gives the names of all these 24 forms. Purushottam, Achyuta, Nashinga, Trivikrama, Rishikesha, Keshava, Madhava, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Sankarshan, Sridhar, Vasudev, Damodar, Janardhan, Narayan, Hari, Padmanabha, Vamana, Madhusudana, Govinda, Krishna, Vishnamurti, Adoksaja, and Upendra. These 24 forms of the localized personality of Godhead are worshipped in different parts of the planetary system. And in each system, there's an incarnation of the Lord having a different Vaikuntha planet in the spiritual sky, which is called the Paravyoma. There are many other hundreds and scores of different forms of the Lord, and each and every one of them has a particular planet in the spiritual sky, of which this material sky is only a fragmental offshoot. The Lord exists as Purusha, or the male enjoyer, although there is no comparing him to any male form in the material world. But all such forms are Advaita, non-different from one another, and each of them is eternally young. The young Lord with 4 hands is nicely decorated as described below. So a few more verses, which will give us a good idea about the beauty of Paramatma within the heart. His mouth expresses his happiness. His eyes spread like the petals of a lotus, and his garments, yellowish like the saffron of a kadamba flower, are bedecked with valuable jewels. His ornaments are all made of gold, set with jewels, and he wears a glowing headdress and earrings. His lotus feet are placed over the whorls of the lotus-like hearts of great mystics. On his chest is the Kaustubha jewel, engraved with the beautiful cap, and there are other jewels on his shoulders. His complete torso is garlanded with fresh flowers. He is well decorated with an ornamental wreath about his waist and rings studded with valuable jewels on his fingers. His leglets, his bangles, his oiled hair curling with a bluish tint, and his beautiful smiling face are all very pleasing. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the most beautiful person among others. And here Shukadev Goswami, he's describing every part of his transcendental beauty one after another. Why is he doing this? In order to actually teach the impersonalist that the personality of God is not an imagination by the devotee. In other words, all this step-by-step process of devotional service, it's really meant for the Mayavadis to make that point that Krishna is a person. He's not imagination. A devotee is not imagining it for the purpose of worship. But he is the supreme person in fact and in figure. The impersonal feature of the absolute truth is only his radiation, just like the rays of the sun are just radiations from the sun. So in our next slide, Shukadev Goswami takes us on a deeper meditation of the supersoul by beginning from the lotus feet. So in text 12, he says, the Lord's magnanimous pastimes and the glowing glancing of his smiling face are all indications of his extensive benedictions. One must therefore concentrate on this transcendental form of the Lord as long as the mind can be fixed on him by meditation. So here Prabhupada in the purport explains how the impersonalist, he goes through so much difficulty because of his impersonal meditation, but the devotee, due to his personal service, he progresses very quickly. And so really the impersonal meditation is actually a source of suffering. And so the impersonalist is actually going through a very difficult, hazardous process, whereas the personalist is enjoying his relationship with Krishna. In text 13, the process of meditation should begin from the lotus feet of the Lord and progress to his smiling face. The meditation should be concentrated upon the lotus feet, then the calves, then the thighs, and in this way higher and higher. The more the mind becomes fixed upon the different parts of the limbs, one after another, the more the intelligence becomes purified. So the recommended process is starting from the feet upwards. So again, Prabhupada is explaining how Krishna is not impersonal or void. So one should meditate either on his Virat Rupa or on the Super Soul, right? Virat Rupa, of course, one has to begin with that. And then one can go to his beautiful form within the heart, the Sachit Ananda Vigraha form. And these are all authorized forms, the Vishnu forms, because, and this is what something Prabhupada emphasizes. This is not imaginary. It is made of a spiritual quality, whereas the Virat Rupa is made out of the material qualities. So why should we go from the bottom up? Because the smiling face is Krishna's, Prabhupada explains, is Lord Krishna's rasa dancing is the smiling face of the Lord. So I'll read a little bit of the purport. Since it is recommended in this verse that one should gradually progress from the lotus feet up to the smiling face, we shall not jump at once to understand the Lord's pastimes in the rasa dance. It is better to practice concentrating our attention by offering flowers and tulsi to the lotus feet of the Lord. In this way, we gradually become purified by the archana process. We dress the Lord, bathe him, etc., and all these transcendental activities help us purify our existence. When we reach the higher standard of worship, of purification, if we see the smiling face of the Lord or hear the rasa dance pastimes of the Lord, then we can relish his activities. And that is why Srimad Bhagavatam, the rasa dance pastimes, are delineated in the 10th canto, chapters 29 to 34, he says. And one other warning that he gives in that same purport is that those who are engrossed in sense gratification, they should not do archana. They should not do deity worship, or they should not touch the form of the Lord. And this is, of course, for the impersonalists and the voidists. Okay. So then after describing Parikshit Maharaj, Shukadeva Goswami, after describing how one should meditate on the supersoul, he describes the process of yoga by which one can perform the 8 limbs of yoga, beginning with yama, niyama, asanas, etc., and in order to control the mind. And then when the mind is controlled, then to withdraw the mind from the sense objects. And that's, that's actually, when you think about it, that's really what we are trying to do all day. Is to withdraw the mind from the sense objects. We try to avoid contemplating on the objects of the senses, and how to take our material desires and spiritualize them. So when the mind is withdrawn from the sense objects, it's called dharana, and then dhyana, and then comes samadhi, is when the mind focuses on the supersoul. And then one reaches samadhi, that's one achieves the state of labhupashyanti, Shukadeva Goswami explains, which means complete satisfaction, where all the elements, where all the elements, like the mind, the false ego, they are brought in line with the desires of the supersoul. That's what samadhi means. The state of labhupashyanti means that everything, all our mind, senses, intelligence, everything is brought in line with the desires of the supersoul. In other words, our consciousness is completely purified, and one's desires become one with the desires of the Lord. So after describing that wonderful state, naturally, when one reaches this perfected stage, then one is not affected by anything lower. One is fully satisfied by virtue of connection with Krishna. And therefore one surrenders to the Lord. So now Shukadeva Goswami is going to explain the 2 different types of yogis. This is very interesting. And so in our next slide, he's going to explain the yogis who have material desires. Now, where do they go? Now, this is really interesting for the children. And it's good to understand this so that we can explain that to our children very nicely. And we can even explain them with some, with pictures and, making drawings, and in this way, so that they can let the imagination go and have a lot of fun. So where do these yogis who have material desires go? So Prabhupada explains in the purport that in the upper planetary systems, there's greater facility for enjoyment, right? We know that, we understand that from the Srimad Bhagavatam. As we go higher and higher, the happiness becomes more and more greater. Why? Because the happiness becomes more and more subtle. So in this way, the yogi, he raises the life air. Prabhupada explains in the purport how the yogi raises the life air and then raises the soul through his own power and leaves the world when it bursts through the appropriate hole. So this is the yogi who has not achieved the state of labhupashyanti. In other words, he still has material desires. He can go anywhere, but he must take the material coverings with him. So we're not talking about the yogi who's transcendental. We're talking about the yogi who by his own power wants to go to a better situation. Such a yogi has heard that about these higher planets, and he's curious, and he has a desire to make a tour, like a tourist. A tourist, some inquisitive tourist would want to take a tour around the world, right? So this yogi is like that. But he must take his material mind and intelligence with him. He can go anywhere through his yogic powers. He can go anywhere within the material world, the sun, moon, the heavenly gardens, like a tourist, right? And this is what the yogis are. These yogis, just like, there are many people like that, especially in the 1960s, we had many of these hippies who loved to, who were very curious, right? And they would maybe meet someplace and they would discuss how many years they've been traveling, 4 years, 7 years. In the same way, the yogis can travel for thousands of years without returning. They're much more powerful. But actually, Prabhupada says this is actually not very wonderful because he can easily get out completely. All he wants to do is to lord over the material world with his siddhis. The devotee does not want to dominate, but wants to be dominated. And, and one has to develop that serving mood, he says, to go to the spiritual world. With the yogi, he wants to go to the best in the material world, but not the kingdom of God. So, because to go to the kingdom of God, one has to give up the material mind, selfish mind, desiring sense pleasure. Material. And then the transcendental yogi is very different. Maybe I'll read a little bit of the purport here. Yeah. Since Prabhupada writes, since a materialist is generally inquisitive to experience what is actually in such planetary systems, he wants to see everything personally. As inquisitive persons tour all over the world to gain direct local experience, the less intelligent transcendentalist similarly desires to have some experience of those planets about which he has heard so many wonderful things. So in our next slide, Shukadev Goswami is going to talk about transcendental yogi who wants to go to the spiritual world. And this will be covered in verses 23 to 30. Verse 23. The transcendentalists are concerned with the spiritual body. As such, by the strength of their devotional service, austerities, mystic power, and transcendental knowledge, their movements are unrestricted within and beyond the material worlds. The fruitive workers of the gross materials can never move in such unrestricted manner. So these yogis have freedom to move anywhere, everywhere. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, the polar star of the universe and the circle thereof is called the Shishumara circle. And therein the local residential planet of the personality of Godhead, Kshirodakshayi Vishnu, is situated. Before reaching there, the mystic passes over the Milky Way to reach Brahmaloka. And while going there, he first reaches Vaishnavara Loka, where the demigod controls fire. On Vaishvanara Loka, the yogi becomes completely cleansed of all dirty sins acquired while in contact with the material world. The Milky Way is the sky. In the sky is indicated herein as a way leading to Brahmaloka, the highest planet of the universe. In verse 24, Shukadeva Goswami says, O king, when such a mystic passes over the Milky Way by illuminating Shishumna to reach the highest planet, Brahmaloka, he first goes to Vaishvanara, the planet of the deity of fire, wherein he becomes completely cleansed of all contaminations. And thereafter, he still goes higher to the circle of Shishumara to relate with Lord Hari, the personality of Godhead. And then here in the purport, Prabhupada condemns material scientists' endeavor to reach other planets by mechanical vehicles. Because you can see it takes a lot of endeavor to go to other planets, right? So this the material scientist endeavor sounds very puny, doesn't it? So it's better, Prabhupada writes, to go by earning it. If one is qualified, one can go, like the materialistic yogi, he can go. But one has to have one has to have the qualification. So materially, Prabhupada writes, one can go, even as much as to Swargaloka, heavenly planets, or even, he says, to Janaloka, but not beyond that. And to go to Janaloka, one has to, the process that a material scientist would have to develop has to be more subtle than rather than gross, right? And in return, Prabhupada compares how the transcendentalist yogi, who has nothing to do with gross material body, can actually move anywhere, everywhere. And he gives, and that includes all the upper planetary systems like Mahar, Janas, Tapas, and Satyaloka. And they can even move freely in the Vaikuntha planets as unrestricted spacemen. And the examples he's giving is Narad Muni. And Durvasa Muni, Narad Muni is an example of a transcendental spaceman, and Durvasa Muni is an example of a mystic. So by the strength of devotional service and mystic powers, one can do that. Verse 25, this Shishumara is the pivot for turning of the complete universe, and it is called the navel of Vishnu, Garbhodakshayi Vishnu. The yogi alone goes beyond this circle of Shishumara and attains the planet, Maharloka, where purified saints like Bhrigu enjoy a duration of life for 4,300,000,000 solar years. Long time, Maharloka, one lives, right? This planet is worshipable even for saints who are transcendently situated. At the time of, that's text 26, at the time of the final devastation of the complete universe, at the end of the duration of Brahma's life, a flame of fire emanates from the mouth of Ananta at the bottom of the universe. The yogi sees all the planets of the universe burning to ashes, and thus he leaves for Satyaloka by airplanes used by the great purified souls. The duration of life in Satyuga is calculated to be 15,480,000,000,000 years, almost like 16 trillion years. That's the duration of life of Brahma, by the way. So that's the duration of life in Satyaloka. In that planet of Satyaloka, there's neither bereavement, nor old age, nor death. There's no pain of any kind, and therefore there are no anxieties, save that sometimes, due to consciousness, there's a feeling of compassion for those unaware of the process of devotional service who are subjected to unsurpassable miseries in the material world. After reaching Satyaloka, the devotee is specifically able to be incorporated fearlessly by the subtle body in an identity similar to that of the gross body. And one after another, he gradually attains stages of existence from earthly to watery, fiery, glowing, and airy until he reaches the ethereal stage. So Prabhupada, so Shukadeva Goswami in text 31, in 30, he says, the devotee, thus surpassing the gross and subtle forms of coverings, enters the plane of egoism. And in that status, he merges the material modes of nature, ignorance, and passion in this point of neutralization, and thus reaches egoism in goodness. After this, all egoism is merged in the Mahatattva, and he comes to the point of pure self-realization. Only the purified soul can attain the perfection of associating with the personality of Godhead in complete bliss and satisfaction in his constitutional state. Whoever is able to renovate such devotional perfection is never again attracted by this material world, and he never returns. So this transcendentalist yogi, he sees the material body as the greatest burden. So he does not want this burden. And so he wants to leave the material world. And this is when he decides to leave. But in order to leave the world, he has to get purified. And so this process of yoga is a process which is indirect, right? It's very intricate and difficult. And the process of gaining the spiritual world by the yogi is similarly difficult. And then it is also, Prabhupada is saying how it's also very tricky and intricate. And what they are describing here, how the yogi, he first goes to this fire planet, the Vaishnavara planet, where he gets purified, because fire ultimately is a purifying agent. So he gets purified of all material contamination. And then, of course, he leaves behind his gross body at that point. And he's traveling, of course, and then he's traveling in his subtle body now, right? And he has to purify even that. It's not like purifying just the gross body, but he has to also purify the subtle body. So the problem is that we don't understand that we need that purification. When we are conditioned, we don't give enough value to this process of purification. In other words, doing our sadhana means this process of purification, because even this yogi, who wants to go to the spiritual planet, he also has to go through purification. So in other words, there's no getting away from the process of purification, whether we do it the indirect way or we do it the direct way. And whereas the gross material is trying to, enjoy in a gross way, in all the physical things, but actually, one can enjoy greater happiness when we enjoy in a subtle consciousness. In other words, one can enjoy all happiness is enjoyed in the consciousness. The problem is we are trying to enjoy through matter, but the more subtle our consciousness gets, our happiness for enjoyment is greater. So that's why the enjoyment in the material world is considered very gross, which is very gross to somebody living in the higher planets. So as long as one is enjoying in the gross way, one cannot really be happy. So therefore, one has to purify and get on a subtle level. Now we understand that how the yogi was going when the yogi was going through different planets, for further and further purification. He ultimately still had to even give up his subtle body, right? And he had to, and how as from step by step as he's giving away his subtle body, in order to get to the spiritual planet, one has to come on the highest level, and that's the level of the soul, which is even more subtle than the subtle body. So one example that Prabhupada explains is that how a person, when he has who has a finer taste in food, for example, suppose he's a connoisseur for tasting food, he's naturally enjoying more than the person who's hogging it down, who's just taking something and eating it, right? In other words, a dog is enjoying and a connoisseur is also enjoying, even though both are thinking they're enjoying, but the enjoyment of the latter is greater compared to the dog. So similarly, when our consciousness becomes more subtle, the more we become happy and peaceful. And so you can imagine when we come to the platform of the soul, how blissful that happiness is. And that is the process of going through the different planets that the yogi is going. And each one has a different level of enjoyment. And that feels very blissful to him. But for a transcendentalist yogi, he knows, he's already understood that actually the most blissful is to be united with Krishna, to be with Krishna and to be completely on the platform of the soul. So he keeps going, right? And he goes through the process of purification. Whereas the materialistic yogi, he stops. Because he's got this fascination, where as he experiences greater and greater happiness on a more subtle level, he naturally is feeling very, a byproduct of that is peace. That's why one cannot even imagine the type of peace that one can experience somewhere like in Brahmaloka, starting actually from Maharloka, and then Tapas, Janaloka, and then Tapasloka, and then Brahmaloka, where Brahma resides. So he feels, he feels a level of happiness that is completely not even understandable by us here in this material world. And so Prabhupada explains how he goes first to the fire planet, he gets purified, and then he goes to the Shishumara, the Milky Way, and he gets purified. Then he goes to the Dhruva planet, and he has some contact with Kshirodakshai Vishnu, but he is on his way out of the universe because he wants to get out. And in each stage, he has to become more and more purified and get rid of his baggage. Now, and it also explained how Maharloka, just to review, because this is all so much here, to digest, right? So here, so when he's on, then finally he goes to Maharloka, where sages live almost like 4 billion years. He has already passed Indraloka and all these heavenly planets. So in this way, he goes higher and higher and experiences greater and greater happiness. And then he finally reaches Satyaloka, where Brahma lives 16 trillion years. And Prabhupada explains how the existence is so fine there that actually there's no trace of anxiety, and it's more and more subtle, very subtle. It's more wonderful than Maharloka and Indraloka. But the transcendental yogi is very fixed. He's not enamored by these things. The soul, he understands that the soul is more subtle than the finest matter. And to get to Golok is something is needed. Something different is needed. So as long as he's in the material planets, he's being influenced by the material energy. Remember, these are not spiritual planets. These are material planets. So he's still affected by the material energy. But the transcendental yogi understands that in order to go to Goloka, something different is needed, and that is the spiritual energy, the Ladini Shakti. And this is the serving energy of the Krishna, the Ladini potency. But the point here is also being made that, the difference is being described here, that of the differences in different planetary systems. And also it was explained how in Satyaloka, there was no anxiety, basically, and just a little feeling of compassion for those suffering in the material world. In other words, the people over there have the ability to perceive how miserable folks in the lower regions are and how they suffer, and so they feel some compassion. Other than that, there's no misery there. And so this yogi, this transcendental yogi, he gradually attains the stage and he starts leaving the universe. He does not want to stay in the universe. He wants a different level of existence. He doesn't want to even stay in Brahmaloka. And then after Brahmaloka comes all the different coverings of the universe. So the yogi, he starts leaving behind all these subtle coverings of earth, water, fire, air, ether, until he reaches the ethereal stage. And then he gives up the subtle sense objects, the false ego, and then he merges into the Mahatattva. Basically, it's like reversing, and we'll come to that in the, I think it's in the next chapter, and then again in the third canto. So he's reversing the process of creation. And the process of creation is where the coverings are put on the soul. So when a living entity is created, all the different coverings are put on him. And when the transcendental yogi is leaving, he uncovers all these coverings. He's reversing that. So in the creation process, the first thing that's created is the false ego and the modes of material nature that we're going to read about in the next chapter. And from false ego, when we combine that with the mode of goodness, the mind is created. And then the false ego in the mode of ignorance, the working senses are created. And the false ego with the mode, combining with the mode of passion, comes the knowledge acquiring senses. And there's a lot more detail to this. So in this way, the yogi merges one by one, uncovers himself with all these things, these different false egos and the different products, and reaches the stage of the real ego, the pure ego. So in this way, he is fixed in self-realization. Now, in the last slide, we're going to talk, Shukadeva Goswami is going to give the easy, direct way to Maharaj Parikshit. He's really going to give the essence of what he's trying to tell Maharaj Parikshit. And what he says is, now all this can be achieved in a more simpler way, he says. And that's explained from verses 32 to 37. Prabhupada explains in the purport how the soul who has taken to Krishna consciousness, how he leaves the material world. How one waters the seed of devotional service through the process of hearing and chanting. How one has to protect the seed from weeds. These are the behavior not befitting those on the spiritual path. And to do that, one has to avoid these offenses, which can be done through the process of hearing and chanting. So text 32 to 37 is actually the explanation of what Shukadeva Goswami really wants to tell Parikshit Maharaj. So far, he has been telling what he should not do. that no one should do. And these, in other words, he's saying, giving the gradual process. There's nothing wrong with this gradual process, but it's not exactly the point that Shukadev Goswami wants to make. In other words, there's so many different processes in self-realization given in the Vedic scriptures, right? The karma process, the jnana process, the yoga process. But all of these are different steps leading to the higher goal. So the best method, he says, is that which is aimed at devotional service of the Lord. And then in verses 36 and 37, he says how Brahma himself, he studied the Vedas 3 times. And what was his conclusion? That attraction to the Supreme Lord is the goal of all processes, because it is Krishna who is in every living being. In other words, the whole purpose is to gain attraction to him and to serve him with love. So I'll just read a couple verses here and we'll end. Yeah. The great personality Brahma, with great attention and concentration of the mind, studied the Vedas 3 times, and after scrutinizingly examining them, he ascertained that attraction for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna, is the highest perfection of religion. O King, it is therefore essential that every human being hear about, glorify, and remember the Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead, always and everywhere. Those who drink through oral reception, fully filled with the nectarian message of Lord Krishna, the beloved of the devotees, purify the polluted aim of life, known as mature enjoyment, and thus go back home, back to Godhead, to the lotus feet of Him, the Personality of Godhead. So I'll end here. I'm sorry, I may have taken a little longer here. And I'll give it over to Rati Preshta Mataji to describe the activities in our guidebook.
Thank you so much, Mataji. It was really wonderful, the journey that you took all of us, journey of the soul, how it goes on. So it was really enlightening. And now I will take everybody with the guidebook presentation. I'll just share the screen. So beginning with the story summary, as it is always very enlightening and very interactive. In fact, the story summary is such that it sometimes takes us to the thought process also. So the way King Parikshit is thinking, how, meaning it starts with King Parikshit sat on the bank of the sacred river Ganges, listening very attentively to the wise words of Sukadev Goswami. The king, who would die in 7 days, had just heard from his spiritual master that by meditating on Lord Krishna's universal form, all impure things in the mind would be cleared away. But the king Parikshit was confused. Now it is taking children to the thought process. How they are cleared away, he wondered. So it is such interactive process that children are automatically, visualizing the entire story. Every chapter is made in such a wonderful manner. And then there are key messages which can help children to memorize the entire chapter in the form of shlokas and the main messages that is being given in the chapter. Then understanding the story questions, which helps children to comprehend the entire story. These are all multiple choice questions, which can be, there can be various fun ways dealing with these questions. And then there are higher thinking questions, which can actually delve deeper into Prabhupada's purpose and help children to understand the philosophy better. Some of these questions, like Srila Prabhupada talks about illusion, explain with examples what do you think illusion is. So it actually takes children into deep aspects of philosophy within every, in every aspect. And then we have activities. So beginning with critical thinking activities, the first one is lifespan activity. Again, it was very interesting when we were doing this chapter with our children. So sometimes it becomes hard for children to visualize billions and trillions years of lifespan in any given planets, higher planets. So this was very interesting activity wherein children themselves researched and find out how many years every different living entities within this earthly planet have their lifespan as. And then it was very interesting when my daughter find out that mayfly lives just for 1 or 2 minutes and English oak tree live for about 1,000 years. So then Prabhupada gives meaning this activity also goes on to help children understand that if you imagine and understand, if you were species with shortest lifespan and you were told the lifespan of the species with the longest, how would you believe it? So this is in a way helping children to understand that there are different lifespans, and then they can understand the lifespans in higher planets also. And then there is this very interesting conference activity called Original Varna Ashram, wherein children are actually have to imagine that they are attending a conference and they have to speak about Indian caste system. They have to first research about these given questions, and then they have to present a speech. So it really helps children to understand the origin of caste system, how it has changed over time, and how it has actually adulterated the way it was started, what was Vedic Varnashram system, the origin of it, and how it has polluted with modern civilization, and the people, how have they changed the Vedic Varnashram system that was actually the origin of it. And then there is this interesting activity to create an advertisement. So children have to create an advertisement showing that these luxurious items, simple living can also be exciting. So this is one of the advertisement with which one student has made. Are you hungry? Eat fresh mango. Are you thirsty? Drink fresh water. So she has tried to meaning she has visualized the village lifestyle, and she has shown here that how children are playing in a pool, water is coming from a tube well on from a tunnel, and then they are playing here. And then they have made a swing on a tree and they are playing swinging on and having full musty, no tension. So she has tried to describe how through an advertisement. So this is creative way of expression, and children tend to um, live the philosophy by these examples. And then there are some introspective activities like DT darshan. So children tend to go to the temple, have darshan, and then come back home. But it actually helps children to be more concentrated upon DTs, and be this also helps children to develop a good personal relationship with the DTs. So it helps them to observe like how were the Lord's lotus feet decorated, what colors were DTs wearing, what were the DTs holding. So all these aspects make all this process a very personalized one. And then there is label the super soul activity, wherein children have to go through the purports and the translations, and they have to actually label different aspects of the super soul that have been very beautifully highlighted in the translations as well. So this is how she has kind of labeled all the aspects of super soul. And then moving ahead, there are various action activities like camping essentials. Now here it is very interesting. Children are encouraged to go out camping, and it says that to be sure to pack the necessary things, and then like for example arms to sleep on, palms of hands to eat. So it is encouraging how we can be satisfied with simple living, and what is actually provided to us by the Lord, we should be satisfied with that. And then children are also encouraged to keep a journal to the document of their experience and collect things from the nature during their camp. And then there are various artistic activities like meditation flow chart, which one of 6-year-old boy has made, wherein he has highlighted that how moving on from lotus feet to calves to thighs to belly, then chest, then shoulder, and then face and eyes of Krishna's. So this is a meditation flow chart which one of the child has made. And then create the super soul is another. These are all artistic activities, different ways to help children understand these philosophical points. So draw and paint a picture of personality of Godhead in the heart and decorate it using the description provided in the chapter. So again, an artistic way. And then again, there is another activity wherein they have to paint a super soul in the area of the heart on any t-shirt. So they have to do a fabric paint here. And then there are theater activities which bring out the acting dimension in children, which they really love to do. And like, for example, here there is a football commentary on how a soul is going and moving from various planets, which Mataji has very in a philosophical manner explained. So here children can do a football commentary on how a soul is going and traveling from various planets, and how it is going up and then finally reached the supreme goal of Dham. And then there are various writing activities, like, for example, this is a story writing activity, Harry the Hoarder. So here a child has to imagine and write a story on one's own, creating a character called Harry the Hoarder. So my daughter has written this story. I was actually surprised when I also read this story. I'll just read a paragraph of it. Long, long ago, there was a miserly, arrogant, and proud man named Harry. He lived with his innocent wife, a naughty girl, and a cute son. Harry never wanted to spend a penny for his family or even for himself. His children slept empty stomach at times, but he would not get enough food for them, even though he had sufficient money. His wife would be sick, but he would not take her to hospital for medications. Because of all this, Harry's children remained upset from him. They even tried to explain to their dad that he should spend money when there is a need, but nothing seemed to work for it. Like this, it continues, and then she finally something happens in the story, and then Harry realizes his mistakes, and some saint comes and explains him that we all will have to leave our money here only, and when we leave this world. And then Harry understood and realized his mistake. So this is how his story goes on. And then there are various other writing practices like spelling practice. Now, depending upon the age and capacity of your child, parents can actually do a spelling practice. They can even ask for synonyms and antonyms of the given words. So depending upon the age and capacity, it can be done. And then there is what goes where, fill in the blanks kind of activity, wherein a passage is given and there are children have to choose the words from the box and fill it. When they have understood the story summary, it becomes very interesting and children can actually do it in minutes. And then there are spelling errors, wherein now children have to look for a word which is misspelled in the sentence, and then they have to write the appropriate spelling in the blank that is given. Then get the words right. Here again, some words are scrambled, so children have to unscramble it and write it properly in the blank that is given. And then again, the keyword activity, wherein they have to identify the part of the speech, then define the word using either the dictionary, or most children are now used to Google. So then they have to also find out a synonym and antonym. And we also sometimes, I encourage children to now make a sentence from the synonym and antonym also. So it is an extension of this activity. And then meaning this is very preliminary explanation of what a wonderful explanation Mataji has given. And this is my daughter's understanding from her own viewpoint. She has made something which may not be very understandable, but when she explained, it was making sense. So this is an activity wherein children have to make their own, meaning a diagram or a flow chart on the way to Golak Vrindavan. So there are different sequence, meaning there are different steps to the process, and they are all jumbled up here. And child first has to write them in a proper sequence, and then they have to make a flow chart or a diagrammatically creative explanation of it. So I have included this. This can be just an idea. Children can be much more creative than this. So she has made the yogi fall down, because her understanding was, because when one is dying, when one man is dead, so one falls down. So that is why this is sleeping yogi. So then the soul is traveling. First it goes to planet of fire, then pole star, then Maharloka, Then after devastation, meaning when the soul sees that the fire is coming from Lord Ananta Shesha's mouth, so then the airplane comes, and then the soul travels to Satyaloka, wherein it lives there for a long time, and then gradually there are certain elements which are dropped one by one. So first it drops the earth, then it drops the water element, then fire, then air. She could not understand what is ether, so she skipped that, and then it gradually then the mind is purified, then false ego is left out, and then the soul becomes pure, and then she took the soul, that pure soul then returns to Golokdham, where Lord Radha and Krishna are sitting on a lotus flower. So this was her explanation. Older children can also, write a short story, as this activity suggests, about a yogi who makes his way to Krishna. Create your own yogi character and try to be descriptive as possible. What is his name? So they can go ahead as per the age and capacity of children. And then there is this missing word activity sheet, wherein again children have to fill in the blanks from the chapter summary and the story which they have already heard about. And then again, very interesting first letter question game, wherein they can play in teams, meaning in pairs. So one child will ask what word starting with the letter Y is the name of the person who undergoes austerity and process of self-realization. So answer would be yogi. What word starting with the letter B is the name of Lord Brahma's residence? So answer is Brahmaloka. So like this. Very interesting, and children really enjoy these kind of small riddles and quizzes. And then there is this writing a letter about Krishna. So again, a very preliminary step for teaching purposes. Children can actually enjoy writing a letter. It becomes very personal also. So describing, the qualities of Krishna. How does he look like? What are his qualities? Some famous devotees. So here, my daughter again has made this small letter. Krishna looks like a lotus. He has 65 qualities, like he's always happy. His devotees are Prahlad, Dhruva, and Prabhupada, etc. He has many names like Madhav, Govinda, Sham, Damodar, Makhan Chor. He is none other than his name, Krishna. So then she suggests that this is Mahamantra and chant and be happy. So I have taken photocopy of this page, and we have actually folded it and put it in an envelope, and my husband will take all these copies to a nearby COVID care center, which is ISKCON only is running, and all the patients will be given this letter of a 8-year-old girl, so they can at least read, and so this is her opportunity to preach and begin with it. And then there is another activity called plain living and high thinking. So herein, again, their children have to write an essay about what it means to be satisfied with bare necessities of life, and they have to use the following clues, like what is the purpose of human life, what are considered to be the bare necessities of human life, what must a family do to overcome material desires and live transcendentally, what's wrong with fulfilling our material desires. So again, very philosophical discussion can happen on these points with children. And then there are answers to understanding the story, what goes where, spelling errors, what's right. All the answers are also provided so that we can guide children appropriately. Keywords and missing words activity sheet, first letter question game, all of them are there. And then these books are available in India with Golden Age Media and in US via Amazon. Thank you all very much. Now we will open the session for questions. You all can raise your hands and unmute yourselves for the questions.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful explanation. It was kind of, I wasn't sure how to understand these yogis, but then the way you put it, it was really, really enlightening how the two types of yogis attain different destinations. So Mataji, the question I have is, so the transcendental yogis, when they attain the Satya Loka, which is the topmost in this material universe, topmost, they are still conditioned to think in the mode of service. Like, so when they stick to it, they attain the higher. But is there a chance of like falling down, or utilizing the free will for some other purposes when we get there, although it is so subtle?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any guarantee that we go back, or are we still like prone to mistakes?
Well, Prabhupada, in some places, he writes that one can fall down even from that platform, from the Satyaloka. But then we also hear in Bhagavatam that Brahma, when his 100 years is over, he goes to the spiritual world, at that point. So I think there's what it is, what my opinion would be that there's always a tendency, that it's still the material world, the body is still material, even though it's very subtle. It's a subtle form. There's still form, but it's a subtle form. And so one can fall down. There's always that. Only when one goes to the spiritual world, there's no falling back, you see. So at that point, after he leaves the transcendental yogi, when he leaves from there to go to the spiritual world, to go penetrate through the coverings and go to the spiritual world, then he has to shed his material body and develop and have a spiritual body. So yes, one can fall down from that platform. There's always that chance, But the transcendental yogi, he's on his march. He's on his, destination. He doesn't give up till he goes to the spiritual planet. We are talking about the materialistic yogi who may end up in one of the higher planetary systems, for a long time. But your question is, from Satyaloka, when he does go there, what happens, right? So I don't know exactly, really. It can be, I've seen both things in the Bhagavatam, both sides.
Okay. Also, another question was, Krishna consciousness is very inherent in all of us, but at the same time, like, somewhere, some other lines we also study how pure devotees plant the seed of bhakti in the hearts of the disciples. So if it is already inherent, like, what does it mean? How do we understand this? Like,
yeah, it's already there. One has to simply remember Krishna and hear about Krishna, just like the example of anybody suffering from amnesia. If one forgets temporarily, then one has to be reminded. Sometimes those cases happen, right? And then they are reminded, they're taken to those places where where he belongs, and this way he gradually gets his memory back. So in the same way, when we remember Krishna, because he's already there, we are the soul and we're eternally related to Krishna. Even in material sense, sometimes we hear stories of how a child is separated from his biological parent, mother or father, for a long time. And then he finally, when he's brought, immediately there's a connection when they meet, So in the same way, when we hear about Krishna, of course, Krishna is on the absolute platform. There's nothing material. So in other words, when we hear about somebody that we love and we are separated, that hearing doesn't end the suffering. It helps, but it doesn't end the suffering till we are actually united with that person, right? But because Krishna is absolute, when we hear about him and when we remember him, there's immediately this connection. Like Prabhupada gives the example of water. You're very thirsty and you say, water, water, water. And the water is not there. It's not going to quench our thirst, right? But when we think about Krishna or his eternal pastimes, one is immediately united with Krishna. Because he's on the absolute platform. There's no relativity, there's no, hot or cold. He is absolute, So in other words, in the same way, when they play Krishna conscious games, or when they, that's why we try to dovetail everything to Krishna, even their play and even their activities in the house, everything. Right from day one, we try to do that. And it's not something, it's kind of overdoing it. It's actually scientific, just based on this principle, because Krishna, when he's absolute, anything that's in connection with him means that we are actually with him, So when the child plays Krishna conscious games, he's actually with Krishna. Now in a conditional state, we may not have the same ecstasy like a pure devotee goes through. But the point is that our purification has begun, and we actually do experience greater happiness when we're associating with Krishna in this form, right? So in this way, yeah. So that's why remembrance of Krishna and hearing about Krishna immediately awakens that soul. And he's connected. That's why this process of hearing is so important. And the more we keep hearing Bhagavatam and we keep chanting and hearing the chanting, the mantra, and that's why I mentioned in the class how purification is going on, for devotees all the time. Whenever we are trying to connect everything to Krishna, we are getting purified. We're getting purified all the time. And that process, even the yogi is doing in such a difficult way. He still has to, and it's so much suffering for him, right? In a way, when you think about it, what he has to go through to actually get to that platform, to get to the spiritual world. So, but that process is just as effective, is just as bona fide as what we are doing. The journey of the transcendental yogi, why Brahma, Krishna explained this to Brahma. It is coming from Krishna. So it is a bona fide and process, but it's for those who just cannot take the direct process. They're not quite ready for that. So that's why Krishna, is giving us the easier process. Why go through all that? Okay. And that's what in the first verse Parikshit Maharaj is saying, look, this meditation on the universal form is also bona fide. Even Brahma had to do it. But here's the easiest process. In other words, we have the easier process by which we can do it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else would want to ask questions? We still have 5 minutes.
I mean,
yes,
yeah.
Shamarupini Mataji.
Yeah, if we have a little bit over time, it's okay.
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Thank you for the wonderful class. Thank you for the wonderful presentation also. So Mataji, with this transcendental yogis, I don't know, I'm maybe a little bit confused. So they can never be pure devotees, right? They are only meditating on the paramatma form, or I don't know, something I missed.
No, he's going to Vaikuntha. He's not going to the Galok Vrindavan. His destination is Vaikuntha. And that's where the Paramatma form, the Narayan form is existing. So he connects with that. Yeah.
So that means they can, like Narada Muni is also, we say transcendental yogi, we can say that way, right? But he is a pure devotee of the Lord, right? So not all transcendental yogis, like it's not necessary that they might have to take that difficult process, right? I don't know, I'm just...
Yeah. So they don't have to take that difficult process, but they have decided to take that process, And this was very prevalent during Satya Yuga, during that time when the process was meditation, right? The main process of worship was meditation in Satya Yuga. So depending on, because ultimately he has to do bhakti even to get to this platform, But the bhakti is not on the, on that level as, is more on the level of meditation. In other words, there's Aishwarya there, there's Aishwarya. So he's going to the Vaikuntha planets, So the process that the transcendental yogi has adopted is also bhakti. It's also the devotional process, okay? But Narad Muni definitely is one of those transcendental yogis, and remember he meditated on within the heart. Remember he saw the super soul within the heart. So that's why Prabhupada likens him, compares this transcendental Narad Muni to a transcendental yogi. But Durvasa Muni is a mystic, and he's not at the platform of Narad Muni, because he barely gets entrance in the world, barely. It is said that he just met the Lord at the doorway. He really couldn't go in, So he's more on the level of, he's still a transcendental yogi because he did get access, but not quite there. I would say he was more on a materialistic level, a materialistic yogi, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank.
So he's still, I mean, Narad Muni is chanting Krishna's name day and night, you know, so he's definitely, he's the acharya for bhakti, we call him, right? So, yeah, so it's just a different process. It's different how one wants to do it, the difficult way or the easier way. Narad Muni did it the process which he learned in his ashram, which was through the process of yoga, through this process. Now, they don't give any details of him traveling through. I mean, instantly he got a spiritual body and he went, right? Yeah. So there could be a little technical differences here and there. But the point being made, is that a transcendental yogi is quite determined to go to his destination. And this is how he achieves his platform. And he is on the platform of loving devotional service to the Lord.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't understand everything, but this is what.
No, this is a bit very technical, so it was
yeah.
not little bit easy to understand. So that's why I just wanted to.
Yeah. It's very difficult to understand the exact process, the technical process, but we get the point. We get the point that for our purpose we need to go become a transcendental yogi, but we can take the direct way.
So Mataji, is it really important that we need to know all these things? I'm just asking. Like ultimately we know it's bhakti, so why go through? Putting so much effort in understanding. Why just not skim through it? Is it?
It is so important. So you can go through it. You don't have to go into the, but it's so important to know these things. You know why? For me, what it did was that it just struck me how important this process of purification is. Like there's something in that chapter which is going to strike you and make your direct process more stronger. So the process that you've adopted, it'll just give you more faith in that. The process that you are doing is going to give you more faith by reading this. I mean, that's why Prabhupada, we have to read the first 2 cantos, at least to get to the lotus feet of the Lord, It's important to understand and go through that and to see it from the perspective of developing your own inner faith. That this process is what I'm getting is not something ordinary. This same process was done in Satyuga by these people for thousands of years. They were meditating on the supersoul, So how fortunate we are. And it also opens, and another thing it did for me is that, I realized that how irrelevant, how useless it is to go to the higher planets. Because when you go to the 5th canto, you actually develop a fascination for these planets. All the details of the structure of the universe is there. It is so overwhelming and so amazing. And one may develop a desire to go to one of these places when you go to the 5th canto. And that's the fine point where these yogis get sidetracked, because the tendency for enjoyment is there. In the material world, the tendency for enjoyment is there, and it doesn't leave us. So that simply expands into our desire into going to these planets, to these higher planets. Because the more you read about it, and being practitioners of bhakti, we will be reading Bhagavatam. We should read Bhagavatam. So when we go to the 5th canto, we will end up developing the desire, because it's very tricky. And what it does, this 2nd canto is so powerful, because Prabhupada put all his energy into the first 2 cantos. He wasn't sure whether he was going to live through beyond that, right? So he's putting everything here. He's already, making us, give up the desire of going to the higher planetary system so strongly, even before we come to the 5th canto. That's what it did for me, because we are doing 5th canto for our new book now. So I have to study 5th canto all the time, It's just so powerful. The 2nd canto is just so powerful. We should continue to read it, even though we may not understand everything, all the technical part. But we should see it from the light of how Prabhupada is helping us to, to go straight to the spiritual world and not develop this difficult process, or even develop, have, like in the second verse, Shukdev Goswami is saying how don't be, he's telling Parikshit, he has no time, Parikshit. He's warning him, don't be mesmerized by this Vedic, codes, promise of higher planetary, of heavenly planets, because that's what the Vedas are doing, Okay. Yeah. Sorry, very long answer to your question, but it's important that we go through this. Yeah. Mhm.
Anybody else would want to ask?
Okay. Okay, so we can end here, Rati, and I just wanted to comment, Rati, on your presentation. It was just there's a few more who want to
Ankur.
Yeah, but I just want to say, Rati, your presentation was very, very good, and I was actually very impressed by the number of activities that your children had done, and the and how well you explained all these activities that they had done, and it was very nice presentation. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
It developed a desire to want to do the book myself.
We are all eagerly waiting for that.
Yeah.
Ankur Prabhuji, you can unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dhanapranam.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for this, wonderful guidance. Mataji, I need your guidance. Like, I'm doing this seva in Rohini temple.
Mhm.
So I'm doing seva for the ITF thing here, the ISKCON Teenage Forum. So even in ISKCON Teenage Forum, we started, like during this lockdown period, we started reading. We're in lockdown these days in Delhi, right? So we started reading Srimad Bhagavatam, and so we've been reading. So earlier I was doing only for my daughter who is just 6 years old. So there is a difference in the two age groups. So I wanted to understand what would be the exact strategy if you're doing it in the online format and doing for the age group of like 12. They're like from 12 to 15. So what would be the more appropriate strategy? Though I have gone through your earlier batches wherein you discussed in detail, yet it would be great if you could guide me. How do we really take it forward? Only online batch, and the age group is 12 to 15.
Yes, Prabhu. So your question is how we can do online with this age group, how we can do the activities in the guidebook, Prabhu? Yeah. Are you talking
Yes,
about
Mataji, the entire format, reading, then activities and
okay,
everything.
okay. Yeah, perfect.
Like what should be
Yeah, very good. So that's why, I do these presentations. It's for the parents and teachers to actually understand the chapter. And of course, you will be reading it yourself. And so this way, once you get a good grasp of the chapter and the philosophy behind it, then when you're doing it, especially with that age group, it can be a lot of fun, because the format, depending on the time, and what I would do is read through the chapter, have them take turns reading the translations in Prabhupada's book, second canto, second chapter, and then opening it for discussion as we read. Okay. Now, so that will become very easy if you just kind of look through it before and understand what kind of things you may want to discuss with them. And some they spontaneously come up, those questions. And so do a little discussion and make sure that they've understood this chapter and they're really kind of relishing it and enjoying it and kind of letting the imagination go, because it's that kind of chapter, isn't it? And then in the next session, you could do the activities, whichever you decide to pick. And like Rati Mataji has gone through some of these activities very nicely. So you could pick for that age group, what would be a good activity for that age group, and it could be whichever one you liked. I would have to look through that. But for teenage children, naturally, it will be a little bit more challenging, not very, like you could skip maybe the English language activities. You could do the more thinking questions, maybe the journey of that yogi going from one planet to another. That is a good one. and probably a little write-up on, a little, that one was good, the Harry Border, they will, not this, older child will naturally give his own version of the story. So every activity can be adapted to, to according to the age group. So you can end up like that. So an online thing, it's sometimes very difficult to do hands-on activities, like art projects and all, but definitely thinking questions can be done, you know where, in terms of writing, of course, that may be difficult unless they do it as a homework when they go home and they send it to you or something. Otherwise, you can just do the part where you can ask them questions, the higher thinking questions, and also some critical thinking activities can be discussed online over the phone. Yes. So you just pick out all the
Yes, please.
things that you feel would be easy and which is practical. Otherwise, you can give some a small story writing or something for homework if you think they will be able to manage. But remember that the whole point I make is that not to make it cumbersome for them, because Bhagavatam should be. We are trying to develop an attraction for Shastra for them.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Definitely, definitely. I always try to keep that in mind. So even, one challenge comes that, when we are purely in one session, purely into reading and then explaining. So how
Mm-hmm.
would you recommend, like, first we read through turn by turn, that's what we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So shall we stop for discussions during reading, or shall we do the reading round complete and then only enter into discussions?
No, 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 no. You have to do discussions as you read. Otherwise, you'll forget those points. Like you don't have to discuss every
Right.
translation, but you have to stop and discuss wherever you think
Yes, yes,
appropriate. And the key thing is, as you when
yes,
you
yes.
prepare for that chapter, you go through the purports, then you make a note on the side, in case you don't forget, or you underline those areas where you want to discuss. If you don't, yeah. So you take a little ruler and you lightly underline those areas that you want discussion in those purports. Okay. So depending on, if you need to finish it in 1 hour, so accordingly you can do that. Sometimes a chapter you cannot finish in 1 hour. So that's another
Yes,
challenge. So sometimes
that is
what
a
I do,
challenge. That is a challenge.
yeah, but sometimes, so what I do then, because if you do want to finish in one chapter, you summarize what they haven't read. I do that also. Like, I just, like if the last few verses are not really anything that they would miss in terms of understanding the essence of the chapter, then you can just summarize
Okay.
it and finish that chapter.
Oh,
Okay. Because, like I
all
said,
right.
Bhagavatam can be understood in stages. We're not trying to give them everything, but yet they should understand the essence of the chapter, and it should kind of be complete in the sense that they know what they've done. So you can still end the chapter like that.
So, I mean, just to share the experiments that I have done little experiments with them in different weeks. So in
Mm-hmm.
1 week, what we did was we did complete reading, and then
Mm-hmm.
in the next class, we read complete. I mean, from your book, the complete chapter along with the key messages.
Mm-hmm.
In one class, what we did was we read the translations first, and
Mm-hmm.
in the same class, it was accompanied by the key messages, the discussion of the key messages. Or
Okay.
maybe in one class what we did was 70% chapter was completed. We thought that remaining 15 minutes we will utilize for discussing only those key messages which have been covered, and then remaining portion we covered in the next class, and then the key message for that portion accompanied by question and answer round.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we have tried in different formats, but
Yeah.
I
So
was able to read.
yeah, whatever works for you, Prabhu, and you see the most enthusiasm in whatever type you tried out, you should take that process. So it's nice that you're trying out different things. Now, one other way would be to go through the translations and, and discuss them. And as a teacher, you make sure the discussion is also going in the right way in the terms of um, getting what the essential points that Prabhupada is making, in terms of understanding for example, in this chapter is like, okay, these are the two types of yogis. We want to be the second type, but yet that process is very indirect. So for us, this direct process will give us the same result. Okay. So as long as you're covering this essential point, throughout the discussion, then you've done well. Because then when the activities come, there's no confusion, you see. So
Right,
so you
right, right.
so you can skip the themes and just do the chapter and discussion, having studied the chapter yourself, and then towards the end of the chapter, when you've already discussed, you can cover the key themes in the same session. Like
Okay,
wait till the
right.
end, wait till the end. And of course, if you haven't covered all the verses, you just discuss the key themes of what you have covered. That's would
Okay,
be
okay.
fine. Okay.
This is what you even you would suggest.
Yeah, I would suggest discussion of the key themes after you've almost finished the chapter, and leaving enough time for the key themes, which should not be too much, because it shouldn't, you don't need to leave that much time. Basically, they need to understand, because this is an extra thing that they're doing, Shastra, right? It's not part of the school curriculum. So what I would do is just key themes will come in terms of understanding what we are trying to cover in this chapter. But the main thing is reading and
Right,
discussion, and opening up their minds and developing loving devotional service to Krishna. That is the main essence of the whole thing. That they understand that ultimately one has to take shelter of Krishna and surrender to him. And then once you've done that, then when you come to the activities, they haven't lost that essence. Okay.
right, right, right. The
Yeah.
last question I would ask.
Mhm.
That is when you are saying that in the classes we open discussions.
Mhm.
So what like there is one thing that okay, this much we have read and this is the understanding. I'm explaining as a teacher. That
Mhm.
is one form like didactic. This is more of didactic thing
Mhm.
that I explain as a teacher. This much we have read, I'm explaining. This much we have read, I'm explaining. Uh, the other is that we really have an open discussion kind of a thing. So which one do you do in your class and which one which form do you recommend generally?
Mhm. Well, what I do is I keep to the chapter, um, more or less, because I want them to understand Prabhupada's purpose through me, the way I've understood it. So I try to do that. If you leave it too open-ended, then the chances are
Yes,
that, yeah, so we forget because what
yes,
we're
yes.
trying to do through the study of Bhagavatam, we are trying to develop the the faith in the Vedic authority. Because like I said, there's so many authorities in the world today. And
Right,
they're always competing with each other. Most of these kids are going to school. So
right,
how do you establish the Vedic authority? Is not through, you know, shoving it down the throat, but through logic, through reasoning, through stories, right? So
right, right,
I try to keep within that chapter, not make it too open-ended. So we lose the whole purpose. Okay.
right, right, right. Sure. I mean, for so many weeks I was doing and I was not asking, and so I mean, collected so many questions, so many doubts. So I thought one day I'll, seriously ask
Oh,
Mataji.
yes.
So it was
Yes.
like that. So I wanted to accumulate a lot of things. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Mataji. This will really work.
Yes.
And I will try and maybe in the upcoming sessions, I'll ask some more
Yes,
doubts.
Prabhu. Yes, yes, yes. You're doing a great job. I mean, to try different measures. I mean, you're so sincere and doing such wonderful job. Yeah, you can definitely, you can even, if you want to video something and show it to us sometimes, it'll be great. Okay. Mm.
Okay, great, great. Thank you, Mataji. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, and thank you so much, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Yeah,
Krishna,
in
Dhan
fact,
Pranam.
I would also request other parents who are trying these activities with their children, they can send me the pictures or the videos and we can share it for the welfare of everybody, meaning everybody can learn from those activities. So if I would really, it would be good if you can share your activities and, it would come as an inspiration for others also. You can always share, WhatsApp me and I would then share it in class.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that's the end. We've already taken a lot of time. So, yes, thank you very much. Sorry if I didn't get to somebody's question. We can maybe address it next time. Hare Krishna. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you, all of you. Hare Krishna.